She was chained as a witch, but her touch healed the gunman sent to end her. The town of Harmony Creek was a whisper of a name in a land that screamed desolation. Dust-choked, sun-scorched, and clinging to its rigid beliefs like a drowning man to a life raft, it exuded a pervasive air of suspicion, fear, and a chilling, almost pious certainty of its own righteousness. Here, morality was a bludgeon, not a bomb. Jude Harlan, a bounty hunter carved from cynicism and scarred by a past he rarely acknowledged, rode into Harmony Creek with the stoic detachment of a graveyard sentinel. His face etched with the lines of too many harsh winters and violent encounters betrayed nothing. He was a man who traded in consequences his Colts as worn as his soul. The townsfolk, a tight-lipped, God-fearing lot, had hired him for a peculiar job to escort a witch, a young Indian woman named Winona, accused of dark root magic and strange songs, to the pyre grounds down south, a grim piece of work even for a cynical gunslinger like Jude. As he stood before the crude stable, the stench of straw and fear thick in the air, he saw her, bound yet unbroken. Her eyes, ancient and calm, met his. "You'll need me," she whispered before we reached the end of the trail. A chill colder than the desert night slithered down Jude's spine. He scoffed, but the words, like a rattler's warning, had already burrowed deep. The wind, an unseen sculptor, carved the land into gaunt, skeletal ridges, dusting everything with the fine, unforgiving grit of the high desert. Harmony Creek was less a town and more a wound in the earth, a cluster of sun-bleached wood and grim, silent faces. It lay cradled in a vast, indifferent emptiness, where the sky stretched forever, a canvas of brutal blue. Here, faith was a fortress, fear its mortar. And within those walls anything unknown was quickly deemed unholy. Jude Harlan rode in a shadow against the blazing western sun, his presence as stark and unyielding as the landscape itself. His horse, a gaunt roan, seemed to mirror its rider's weary endurance. Jude was a man forged in the crucible of hard choices, a bounty hunter whose ledger balanced in blood and coin, rarely in justice. His face, a roadmap of harsh winters and desperate skirmishes, was a mask of practiced indifference. Eyes like flint, they surveyed the town's main street, devoid of the usual boisterous clamor, replaced by a hushed, almost expectant tension. He noticed the furtive glances from behind lace curtains, the way men stiffened hands, hovering near their belts as he passed. He was a familiar type in these parts, a deliverer of consequences devoid of conscience. He dismounted at the town's single rickety saloon, the wood groaning beneath his weight. A shot of cheap whiskey burned a trail down his throat, a fleeting warmth against the chill that seemed to emanate from the very soul of Harmony Creek. He'd been sent for. The message scrawled on a yellowed scrap of paper had spoken of a witch, a danger to God-fearing folk, and a sum of money substantial enough to pique his disinterest in moral quandaries. He was a practical man. Gold glittered. Souls he'd learned long ago were cheap. The town elders, a quartet of men whose faces were as pinched as their collars, met him in the dusty, echoing hall of the church. Their voices were low-laced with a righteous fervor that grated on Jude's nerves. They spoke of blight, of unholy practices, and of a red Indian woman who dared to heal with roots and strange guttural songs. Winona, they called her, a name that tasted of the wind and forgotten places. She was in the stable, they told him, bound awaiting his journey south to the pyre grounds. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken dread. He took their coin. The weight of it, cold and solid in his palm, was the only truth he acknowledged. Outside, the air was thick with the scent of pine and something else, a faint, earthy aroma like damp soil and crushed herbs, strangely out of place in this dry, unforgiving land. He found her in a makeshift stall amidst the smell of horse manure and stale hay. She sat on the dirt floor, her hands bound tightly behind her with a coarse leather thong. Her buckskin dress, simple and worn, was stained with dust, but her posture was unwavering. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with high cheekbones and a proud, unyielding tilt to her chin. Her dark hair, braided with a single feather, framed a face that held no trace of fear, no hint of tears. Her eyes, deep pools reflecting the shadowed corners of the stable, were unnervingly calm. They met his gaze directly, without flinching, without defiance. Just an ancient, quiet knowing. He felt a flicker of something, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor beneath the armor he wore. He'd seen plenty of broken men and women shattered by fear and despair. She was neither. He knelt, his movements economical, impersonal, and began to fasten the other end of the thong to his saddle horn. Her voice, when it came, was a low murmur like the rustle of dry leaves, yet it cut through the dusty silence of the stable with an unexpected clarity. "You'll need me," Winona said, her eyes never leaving his, "before we reach the end of the trail." Jude Harlan straightened, a harsh laugh dying in his throat. He scoffed, a raw, cynical sound that tasted of dust and disbelief. Need her? He needed no one. He certainly didn't believe in the healing whispers of a red woman's throat, or in any god or any devil for that matter. He believed in steel and gunpowder. He believed in the cold, hard reality of the world. Yet, as he led his horse out into the blinding sunlight, Winona's words, like a coiled rattlesnake, whispered in the back of his mind. A subtle, chilling promise. The trail was long, and the desert, he knew, had a way of revealing truths best left buried. The trail stretched out before them, an endless ribbon of dust and baked earth beneath a sky that pressed down like a hot brass lid. Days blurred into a monotonous rhythm, the rhythmic creak of saddle leather, the jingle of spurs, the relentless sun searing the exposed skin. Jude rode ahead, a silent, grim silhouette, pulling Winona behind him on a lead rope tethered to his saddle. He offered no words, no glances, treating her like just another piece of cargo, a grim duty to be discharged. The silence between them was not empty, but heavy, a dense, unspoken barrier built of prejudice and unspoken accusation. He kept his distance, a few yards separating them, as if her very presence could contaminate him. Once, as the sun dipped, painting the mesas in hues of impossible purple and gold, Winona spoke, her voice a soft current against the vast silence. "The wind whispers stories," she murmured almost to herself. Jude snorted without turning. "The wind just blows dust." She offered no reply, just the steady, measured beat of her footsteps. He quickly shut out such poetic musings, focusing instead on the task, on the miles on the end of this cursed journey. His thoughts were a tangled mess of dusty practicality, financial calculations, and the gnawing discomfort of her unwavering gaze, which he felt on his back, even when he refused to turn. He dismissed it as the trick of a tired mind, the desert playing its usual games. They made camp under the vast, indifferent expanse of the night sky, a million stars pinpricking the velvet black. Jude built a small, efficient fire, its warmth doing little to dispel the chill that had settled deep in his bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the night air. He ate his meager rations, chewed jerky tasting like leather and regret. Winona sat across from him, quiet, her form almost swallowed by the darkness. He offered her nothing, no food, no water, a deliberate cruelty born of his rigid conviction that she deserved none. Yet she did not ask, did not complain. She simply existed, a stoic shadow. "You speak English well enough." Jude grunted one evening, breaking the tense, quiet curiosity warring with his contempt. "Where'd you learn? From those who came to teach?" She replied, her voice calm, devoid of resentment. "And those who came to take." He grunted again, offering no more questions, no softening. The silence returned thicker than before. On the third day, the sun beat down with a vengeance, driving sweat from every pore. The air itself seemed to crackle with latent energy. They rode through a particularly desolate stretch dominated by gnarled mesquite and thorny patches of prickly pear, their shadows sharp and short. Jude, feeling the call of nature, dismounted behind a cluster of imposing saguaros, their arms reaching to the sky like silent ancient sentinels. He unbuckled his belt relief, already washing over him. Then a sudden blur of movement, a flash of patterned scales, a sound that split the dry air, a chilling, insistent rattle like 1,000 dry bones clattering together. Instinct, honed by years of surviving the wild, screamed danger. But it was too late. Before Jude could even draw his Colt, a searing pain exploded in his thigh. A serpent thick as his forearm and adorned with the diamond patterns of a full-grown rattler had sunk its fangs deep into his flesh. The venom worked with terrifying speed. A searing heat spread from the bite, then a numbing cold. His leg buckled. The world tilted the horizon, swimming the bright sun, blurring into an angry red haze. He stumbled, a strangled cry escaping his lips, and collapsed onto the gritty earth. The pain was a living entity consuming him, pulling him into a dark, swirling vortex. He fought it, tried to push himself up, but his limbs refused to obey. A profound weakness unlike any he had ever known washed over him, drowning his senses. Through the haze, a shape moved. Not the horse, but Winona. He watched as if through a thick pane of glass as her bound hands worked furiously. He saw her teeth flash, tearing at the rawhide rope that held her. Impossible. Yet it broke. Her movements were swift, fluid, a blur of purpose. She crawled towards him, a fleeting glimpse of terror in his fading consciousness. Was this her vengeance? Her magic finally unleashed? She knelt beside him. Her touch on his skin was surprisingly cool, firm. He felt her fingers working around the wound, a strange pressure. Then a cool, moist sensation, as if mud were being pressed into the burning flesh. He heard a soft, rhythmic hum, a low, melodic sound that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. It was this strange song the elders had condemned, a low, guttural chant that seemed to weave itself into the fabric of the dying light. It was alien, yet strangely, inexplicably soothing. The pain receded, just slightly, replaced by a dull ache. Darkness claimed him then, absolute and consuming. He woke with the sun high overhead, the desert air crisp and clean. His head throbbed, a dull drumbeat behind his eyes. His leg was a leaden weight aching, but the searing fire was gone. He pushed himself up, leaning on an elbow. Winona sat a few feet away, her hands unbound, watching him with those same impossibly calm eyes. "You... how?" Jude rasped, his voice raw, disbelieving. Winona merely looked at him, her gaze steady. "The desert gives life, and it takes it. Sometimes it offers a choice." She gestured vaguely towards his leg. "The poison leaves a mark." He stared at her, anger and confusion warring in his chest. Why would she save him? The raw, untamed landscape seemed to hold its breath. He wanted to rage, to demand answers, to throw off this debt he hadn't asked for. But the words caught in his throat. What could he say? Thank you. The words felt foreign on his tongue. Instead, in the vast, echoing silence of the desert, Jude Harlan simply reached out and with a rough, ungraceful movement pushed the severed pieces of the rawhide rope towards her. An offering. A truce, however unwilling. He met her gaze, held it for a long moment, then looked away. The trail still stretched before them, but something fundamental had shifted. The barrier, once so solid, now felt terribly unsettlingly porous. The silence between them was no longer the heavy oppressive weight of contempt, but a brittle, watchful stillness. Jude rode with his shoulders hunched, the phantom ache in his thigh, a constant reminder of his unexpected savior. He stole glances at Winona, now not with the cold calculation of a captor, but with a bewildered curiosity. She walked beside his horse, her movements fluid and tireless, her eyes scanning the horizon, reading the unspoken language of the land. He had untied her, and for that there was a strange, silent truce. No thanks were uttered, no pleas for freedom made. Just the vast empty expanse and the knowledge that one life had saved another. They found shelter as twilight bled across the sky, painting the western clouds in hues of bruised plum and fiery orange. It was an abandoned homestead, a skeleton of sun-blecked wood clinging precariously to the side of a low mesa. A single collapsed corral hinted at past dreams, now swallowed by dust and time. The air here held a forgotten echo, a whisper of lives once lived, hopes once held. Inside the dilapidated cabin, the air was stale thick with the scent of decay and long-dead aspirations. Jude kicked aside a fallen rafter, clearing a space near the crumbling hearth. He lit a small fire, the flames casting dancing shadows that swallowed the cabin's empty corners. The warmth felt good, a small comfort against the encroaching chill of the desert night. Winona sat across from him, her back to the wall, her gaze distant, tracing patterns on the dirt floor. Jude watched her. He noticed the delicate curve of her neck, the intricate weaving of her single braid. And then his eyes snagged on it, a small, angry puckering of skin on her left wrist. A scar. Not a jagged cut, but a rounded, almost perfect mark, like a brand, like a burn, the size of a coin, yet deep and fiercely red beneath her darker skin. It pulsed a silent accusation. His voice when he spoke was rougher than he intended, a pebble disturbing a still pond. That mark? Winona's hand instinctively covered it, then, slowly, deliberately, she lowered it. Her eyes meeting his were devoid of accusation, yet filled with a profound weariness. "It means many things," she said, her voice low, a dry whisper. He pushed. "How did it happen?" A long silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire. The air grew heavy, thick with untold stories. Finally, she spoke, her voice flat, devoid of emotion, as if retelling a stranger's tale. "They called my grandmother the one who brings life to new babies. She knew the herbs, the songs, the spirits of the land." Her gaze drifted to the flickering flames as if seeing ghosts dance within them. "When the white sickness came, many died. She healed some. But the fear was stronger than the healing." Jude listened, his jaw tight. He thought of his own little brother taken by the fever in a squalid frontier town years ago. No healer, no songs, just a small wooden cross and a forgotten patch of dirt. "They said her medicine was devil's work," Winona continued, her voice gaining a quiet intensity. "They said her songs were a curse. They tied her to a tree, like they tried to tie me. But they lit the fire for her, right on her wrist, to mark her, to burn the evil out." Her words were a chilling echo of his own mission. She died because of that fire. She died because of their fear, and because of what they called her. She looked at him, then her eyes piercing the darkness, holding his gaze with an unnerving steadiness. "You call me witch. They called her the life-bringer. She died for that name." The word struck Jude with the force of a physical blow. A cold dread, colder than the desert night, seeped into his bones. Witch, life-bringer. The labels so easily flung, so brutally acted upon. He had taken the money. He had accepted the task. He was part of this cycle of fear and condemnation. A deep, unsettling question began to churn in his gut, tasting like ashes. Am I doing right? The thought was foreign, dangerous. He, Jude Harlan, the cynical bounty hunter, questioning his own purpose. He shifted uneasily, his hand instinctively resting on the grip of his Colt. The worn leather felt familiar grounding, a silent assertion of his identity. He was a man of steel, not of sentiment. Yet the question lingered, a persistent burr under his saddle. Winona seemed to sense his turmoil. Without a word, she rose. She moved to the cabin's entrance, her silhouette framed by the starlit night. From a small pouch, she carried one he hadn't noticed before she took out a handful of dried herbs. Their scent, earthy and sharp, immediately filled the air. She crumbled them into the fire, and a thick, fragrant smoke began to curl upward, swirling around them. "For the fever," she said, her voice soft, almost melodic. "To clear the head, to soothe the spirit." The smoke was sweet, intoxicating, unlike anything Jude had ever smelled. It seemed to seep into his very bones, untangling the knots of tension. He watched her fascinated. She was a contradiction, the condemned witch, performing an act of pure healing. My brother, Jude, found himself saying the words escaping before he could stop them. His voice was hoarse, raw with unacknowledged grief. "He died of the fever. When I was small. No doctors around. Just nothing." He swallowed the memory, a bitter taste on his tongue. "He burned up. Just like that." Winona turned her eyes soft with understanding, a rare expression on her stoic face. She nodded slowly. The white man's medicine often fails where the spirits of the land do not. "We just watched him," Jude continued, compelled by some force he didn't understand. "Helpless. Just watched him go." He felt a tightness in his chest, a pain he'd buried for decades. If only... He didn't finish the sentence. If only there had been someone like her. The thought was unspoken, but it hung between them, a fragile bridge connecting their disparate worlds. Winona didn't offer empty platitudes. She simply watched him, her quiet presence a balm. She hummed a low, wordless tune, a different one than the song she sang to him when he was bitten. This one was softer, deeper, a lullaby of loss and acceptance. The smoke curled around them, weaving their shared pain into the vast, indifferent night. The Colt, still at Jude's hip, felt heavy cold, and suddenly profoundly useless. In this moment, under the gaze of a condemned woman in a forgotten cabin, Jude Harlan felt a part of his hardened shell finally crack. The fragile truce forged in the abandoned cabin held stretched taut across the lengthening miles. Jude no longer rode with Winona on a lead rope. She walked freely beside his horse, their pace set by a silent, unspoken accord. The air, though still dry and unforgiving, felt different, less hostile. Or perhaps Jude was simply seeing it through different eyes. He noticed the way Winona pointed out tracks in the dust, the subtle shift in the wind that portended a coming storm, the hidden springs she found with uncanny accuracy. He never asked how she knew, and she never offered explanations. Their conversations, when they happened, were terse, functional, yet beneath the surface something resonated. "That canyon ahead," Winona said one morning, her voice low. "Bad spirits walk there," Jude grunted, scanning the jagged cliffs. "Just bad rock for riding. And maybe a few bushwhackers." His skepticism was ingrained, a comfortable habit. "Not all dangers carry guns," she replied, her gaze fixed on the shadowed depths of the canyon. "Some carry only fear." He chewed on that, a strange unease settling in his gut. The pyre grounds were now just a day or two away, a fact that weighed on him with a growing, suffocating dread. The money in his pouch felt heavier, tainted. He was bringing her to her death after she had twice saved his life. The irony was a bitter taste. His past self would have scoffed at such weakness. His current self felt a cold, righteous anger begin to stir. They were nearing a desolate stretch of gnarled, skeletal trees, their branches twisted like arthritic fingers against the bruised sky. Suddenly, Winona stopped, her head cocked, listening to something Jude couldn't hear. Her hand, for the first time, reached out, gripping his arm with surprising strength. "Ride," she whispered, her voice urgent. "Now." Before he could question her, a shout pierced the silence. There, the witch. From behind the dead trees, a group of men emerged. Not bandits, but something far more chilling. They were clad in dark, homespun clothes, faces contorted by a fervent, almost insane zealotry. Their eyes burned with a self-righteous fury that seemed to consume everything. These were the kind of men who built towns like Harmony Creek and burned what they didn't understand. Jude recognized the wild, desperate glint in their eyes, the same he'd seen in the eyes of the elders back in town. These were fanatics, driven by the very fear that had nearly cost him his life. "By God's will, the foul spawn returns," one man shrieked, brandishing a crudely fashioned torch. "We'll finish what was left undone." Jude saw the glint of the firelight in their eyes, a mirror of the pyre. He remembered Winona's scar, the story of her grandmother. A cold wave washed over him, a certainty of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He looked at Winona. Her face was stoic, resigned. No fear, just that familiar, quiet acceptance of fate. And in that moment, something shifted irrevocably within Jude. It wasn't the money, wasn't the duty. It was the absolute, unyielding calm in her eyes as these devils moved to consume her. It was the stark contrast between her quiet strength and their rabid hatred. It was the simple, undeniable truth that she was life, and they were death. "Get behind me!" Jude growled, his voice low and dangerous, a warning rumble from a coiled snake. His hand flew to his Colt, the familiar weight a comfort, but for an entirely new purpose. "She's a demon, a killer of souls," another man screamed, advancing a rusted pitchfork held aloft. Jude's flinty eyes narrowed. "She saved my life," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, yet radiating absolute conviction. "That's more than any of you God-fearing folk ever did." The leader, a gaunt man with a beard like tangled wires, sneered. "So, the devils touched you too, Outlander. Then you'll burn with her." He lunged forward, the torch swinging like a weapon. The world exploded into chaos. Jude Harlan was a blur of motion, his draw impossibly fast. The first shot cracked, echoing across the desolate landscape, and the pitchfork wielder crumpled. The scent of gunpowder bit the air, sharp and acrid. The fanatics, surprised by his sudden fierce defense, faltered for a heartbeat. But their zeal quickly overcame their shock. Another man pulled out a rusty rifle, its barrel glinting malevolently. "Blasphemer, heathen!" They screamed, a chorus of righteous fury. Jude moved with a practiced, deadly grace, a dance of lead and death he knew too well. Shots barked, spitting fire. He felt a sharp sting, a hot tearing sensation in his left arm as a bullet grazed him, but he barely registered it. His focus was absolute: protect Winona. Not the money, not the town. Her, the woman who brought life. Winona, seeing her chance, didn't stand idle. As Jude emptied his Colt, creating a momentary distraction, she sprang into action. She moved with an innate understanding of the terrain, pulling him away from the main cluster of attackers towards a narrow cleft in the rocks that he hadn't even noticed. "Here!" she yelled, her voice urgent, finally breaking her calm. "Quickly!" He followed, his arm throbbing, but his steps unwavering. The remaining fanatics, enraged, continued to fire wildly, their bullets chipping stone around them. Jude fired a few more warning shots, buying them precious seconds. They scrambled through the narrow crevice, a jagged wound in the earth, until they emerged on the other side, winded but alive. He leaned against the cold rock, gasping, his shirt sleeve torn and blood blooming sluggishly on his arm. The pain was real sharp, but almost secondary to the raw, visceral triumph that surged through him. He had fought. Not for coin, not for a contract, but for something he now knew was good. Winona stood over him, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her eyes, for the first time, reflecting not just ancient calm, but a flicker of awe, of gratitude. She reached out, her fingers gently touching his wounded arm. Their eyes met, and in that shared glance something profound passed between them. It was more than a look. It was a silent acknowledgement of a bond forged in fire and blood. He saw her truly, saw her not as a mission, nor as a witch, but as a living, breathing, defiant human being. And she in turn saw him not as a cold bounty hunter, but as a protector, a man who had chosen life. The pyre grounds now seemed impossibly far away, a cruel joke from a forgotten past. The narrow crevice led them deeper into the embrace of the fractured earth, a silent, winding passage that swallowed the sounds of the distant gunfire, leaving only the rasp of their own breathing. Jude's arm throbbed a dull, relentless drumbeat, but the adrenaline from the skirmish had burned off, replaced by a profound weariness. His legs, still weak from the snake bite, threatened to give way. Winona moved ahead, her steps light and sure, navigating the shadowed labyrinth with an innate understanding Jude could only marvel at. She was a whisper in the wind, a shadow in the rock. They emerged into a hidden sanctuary, a vast, echoing cavern carved by time and ancient hands. It was the ruin of an old temple, a sacred space forgotten by the world where the spirits of the land lingered like old memories. Broken stone altars lay scattered, adorned with faded pictographs, symbols of forgotten gods, of life cycles, of the earth's endless wisdom. The air, cool, and still carried the faint, sweet scent of centuries of dried sage and reverence. Here, away from the screaming hatred of men, a fragile peace settled. Jude sank onto a smooth, worn stone slab, his strength finally deserting him. The wound in his arm, neglected in the chaos, had begun to fester. A chill, clammy and insistent, crept through his veins, quickly turning into a burning fever that racked his body. His teeth began to chatter uncontrollably despite the relatively cool air of the cavern. He was a man accustomed to pain, to hardship, but this felt different. A venomous return, a spiritual reckoning. Winona knelt beside him. Her touch, when it came, was feather light against his burning forehead. She saw the tremor in his hands, the flush in his cheeks, the sudden shallow rasp of his breath. Her eyes, filled with a deep, compassionate understanding, bore no judgment, only a quiet resolve. "The wound festers," she murmured, her voice soft as the rustle of leaves. "The fire returns, not from the serpent this time, but from the tainted blood of men." Jude could only manage a ragged nod, his mind already slipping into a hazy delirium. "Cold," he managed to rasp, his teeth chattering so hard his jaw ached. "So cold." She left him for a moment, moving with purpose through the dim cavern. He heard the faint scrape of stone, the whisper of water. She returned with a small clay pot and a handful of herbs, their fragrance sharper, more potent than the smoke from the night before. She crushed them between two flat stones, murmuring a low chant that flowed like a river, ancient and deep. He watched her, his vision blurring, unable to resist, unable to deny her. He, the man who trusted no one, now trusted this woman, this witch, with his very life. She mixed the paste with water, then carefully, tenderly applied it to his inflamed arm. It was cool, soothing, drawing out the fiery ache. Then she raised the clay pot to his lips. "Drink," she commanded gently. "It will cool the fire within." He drank the bitter liquid, tasting of earth and sunlight, a strange comfort against the burning in his throat. As she tended to him, Winona began to sing. Not the low hum of the previous night, but a full-throated, haunting melody that resonated through the cavern, filling every crack and crevice. It was a song of mountains and rivers, of healing winds and ancient spirits. It wrapped around Jude a warmth that chased away the chills, a balm that soothed his tormented mind. This time, he didn't turn away. He didn't scoff. He let the song wash over him, immersing himself in its strange, beautiful power. He closed his eyes and drifted into a sleep deeper than any he had known, a sleep free of nightmares, cradled by the song of the land. He awoke slowly, the light in the cavern diffused and soft. The fever had broken. His arm still throbbed, but the fire was gone, replaced by a dull, manageable ache. He felt weak but alive, truly, utterly alive. He pushed himself up, his eyes clearing. Winona sat near the entrance of the cavern, watching the shafts of sunlight pierce the dust motes. A sudden, sharp realization hit Jude like a cold splash of water. He remembered. The journey. The pyre grounds. He looked around the ancient temple, then at Winona. They were far from the path, further than he'd intended. He knew these lands even in their wild state. They had bypassed the cursed place. They had gone beyond it. He could turn back, drag her back, perhaps even claim she had died and present a false account, a convenient corpse. Or he could let her go. Let go of the money. Let go of the life he knew, and face the consequences. His choice hung in the air, heavy and immense. He stumbled to his feet, walking towards her. She didn't flinch, didn't move. She simply waited, her gaze steady, knowing. The ultimate decision lay with him. We passed it," Jude said, his voice hoarse, raw with emotion. "The pyre grounds. We're beyond it." Winona turned fully, her eyes searching his, seeking the truth beyond the words. "And so," she said, her voice a quiet challenge, "you still think I am a witch?" The question hung in the still air, a final, defining moment. It was more than a question about her. It was a question about him, about everything he had been and everything he could become. Jude looked into her eyes, truly seeing them for the first time. Not as the eyes of a condemned woman, but as the eyes of someone who had faced death without fear, who had offered life without asking for reward. He remembered the pain of the snake bite, the cold dread of the Fanatics, the warmth of her song, the quiet balm of her healing hands. He remembered his brother's wasted face and the helplessness he felt. A profound understanding, clear and piercing, finally settled over him. He took a deep breath, the air filling his lungs clean and fresh. "I think," Jude said, his voice gaining strength, conviction echoing slightly in the ancient temple. "I think, the ones who call you that, they are the ones who should fear the fire." The words were spoken. The choice was made. The sun, streaming through the cavern entrance, seemed to grow brighter, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny liberated spirits. The weight on Jude's shoulders, the burden of a life lived for coin, and cynicism began at last to lift. Jude Harlan returned to Harmony Creek alone, weary, but with eyes that held a new quiet depth. He faced the town council, his voice flat as he delivered the fabricated account of Winona's demise at the hands of other zealous fanatics in the desert. The lie settled easily with the elders, who heard only what confirmed their beliefs. He accepted the remaining bounty, the coins feeling cold and meaningless in his palm. That very night, Jude rode out of town, abandoning the bounty hunter's life forever. He found a secluded cabin nestled deep within the western mountains, where the pine forests whispered ancient secrets and the clean air cleansed his soul. He learned to live in harmony with nature, far from the judgments and cruelties of men. Occasionally, a small bundle of dried herbs, fragrant and earthy, would appear silently on his doorstep, an unspoken sign of healing, a lasting connection to a world he had nearly destroyed. One night under the pale moonlight, Jude cast the bounty money into his campfire. As the gold melted into shimmering pools, he saw Winona's form in the dancing flames. Not a witch, but a resilient woman who protected life while the world he once knew only dealt in death. He had chosen truth and compassion, finding redemption in a new, quiet, and meaningful existence. The desert night still echoes with Jude's choice, steel-lowered hatred burned away, and a so-called witch walking free beneath the coyote moon. If one man can trade a purse of blood money for a fistful of healing herbs, what would you surrender to break a chain of fear? Tell me in the comments, was Jude's lie an act of courage or just another trail of smoke masking a darker truth? Tap that, like if Winona's song of mercy rattled your bones, and share this tale with a friend who needs a spark of redemption. Because next week the flames roar higher. Bells of the Cat Wagon Revolt. A sisterhood society calls soiled doves, straps dynamite beneath silk corsets, and aims to rob the very men who own their bodies and cage their futures. Powder, glitter, and rebellion coming straight at you from the heart of Dusty Fork. So subscribe, ring that iron notification bell, and keep your saddle cinched tight. The West keeps testing our souls, and our stories are just heating up.